Ladies, gentlemen, and raiders of all Arc, we had the release of patch 1.3 for Arc Raiders earlier today, with quite a few changes to the game in general, and a couple of these patch notes have really been sending players for a loop, both in terms of understanding what exactly those changes are, and why they've been made the way that they have all at the same time right now. And so today we're going to go out and basically just test the differences in explosive damage after the patch to work out what exactly they meant when they said that they have rebalanced explosive damage against Arc for a more consistent experience, along with everything else that they mentioned here too. And while this will affect things like grenades and traps as well, which we will get into a little bit later on, most of this is going to be focused on the Hullcrackers. It's just sort of the biggest deal thing as far as this conversation goes, as the main source of explosive damage that players were using against Arc. That said, let's start by talking about the Hullcracker, and before we get into damage changes, let's talk about the economy of using the weapon now. The big main changes on this side were an adjustment to the price of launcher ammo in the shop from the traders. Before the patch, this was 10 launcher ammo for 6,000 coins, or the equivalent of 600 coins for each launcher ammo. Now you can buy them as a pack of 6 launcher ammo for 4,500 coins, which is the equivalent of 750 coins per launcher ammo. That means it is straight up 25% more expensive to buy launcher ammo now, and that in itself would make the actual economy of using the Hullcracker much worse than it was before the patch all on its own. As well, they have changed the crafting recipe for launcher ammo again. The first time they made it more expensive than it was to begin with, and now they've made it even more expensive in a different way because now it costs 1 arc motion core and 2 accrued explosives for 6 ammo, but the trade-off is that now you can craft launcher ammo from the get-go without needing the blueprint to do so. Overall, even in a world where explosive damage wasn't also adjusted in this patch, this alone makes the Hullcracker way more expensive to run, and it's way harder to actually justify. Before the patch, it took 200 launcher ammo to safely kill the Queen solo. You could do it with less than 200, but 200 was the safe amount to bring into the raid to be sure that you would be able to get it done. Before the patch, 200 launcher ammo was 120,000 coins. Now it costs 150,000 coins, and we're essentially at the breakpoint where even if that was still enough for a queen kill, you'd barely make any profit from doing that if we're talking about pure coin rewards. But the big thing here is that the Hullcracker and explosive damage in general has been changed in a very, very meaningful way. The way that the game worked before, explosives were hitting multiple arc parts at the same time, essentially multiplying their damage exponentially based on how many parts it technically hit. What they've said they did in the patch notes is adjusted explosive damage to make it more consistent, as well as rebalancing the Hullcracker's damage to account for that change. They said that this will require more precision with the Hullcracker, but that it should still deal good damage if you're aiming at the right places. So of course, the next step was to go out and test this. We have plenty of footage of us killing various arc with Hullcrackers before the patch, so those were what I used for my comparisons. And we will sort of go from bottom up here with weaker stuff. Wasps are still 1 shot per kill from the Hullcracker, but the value gained from killing a wasp compared to like the cost of a single launcher ammo is very much not worth doing. Hornets can still be 1 shot with the Hullcracker if you specifically hit one of their back thrusters with it, but front plate or even just hitting them dead on in the underbelly underside area is now never a 1 shot. It's always 2 hits required unless you hit the unarmored thrusters. Next up is a leaper. I was farming through these for the leaper trial just the other day. It took me an average of 5 to 6 Hullcracker shots per leaper, depending on how central mass they actually hit, closer to the leaper core. And now, post-patch, with mostly good center mass hits, it took me 10 Hullcracker shots, so nearly double the shots essentially for a leaper. Next up, let's move on to a much bigger foe and talk about the Bastion, which is basically the tankiest thing until you get to the big event boys like the Queen and the Matriarch. Before the patch, we consistently could get a Bastion down in around 15 Hullcracker shots to the face. You can get it down in less than that with more precision and strategy by stunning it by taking out the legs, then shoot the battery on the back to expose the core, and the core is really weak and stuff like that. But you can do that without a Hullcracker. You don't need a Hullcracker for that. The main reason that we did use Hullcrackers before was because you could just kill the thing in 15 shots with minimal danger or effort, just firing it at the Bastion just dead on for some very solid rewards at the end. However, now after patch 1.3 doing the exact same thing, just firing at the face, it took me a ridiculous 31 shots that connected to kill the thing. So again, essentially double the shots from the Hullcracker for the same amount of damage output as before the patch. The main thing this means is that it's just no longer worth using the Hullcracker in that way. With the increased ammo costs, the investment required to even have a Hullcracker and ammo in case you die during the raid at any point and lose it, and then the fact that it just takes so many more shots now, it is simply no longer worth using the Hullcracker to farm larger arc unless you are using it with high precision to hit their weak points, at which point the Hullcracker isn't really that necessary to begin with, and you might as well just be using heavy ammo weapons and grenades. The Hullcracker is still good at removing armor and exposing weaker spots on an arc, but while that is useful, that's definitely not a utility that is worth the investment of an entire weapon slot filled with a very expensive weapon that you would be pretty sad about if you died while holding. I haven't been able to test the Queen and Matriarch yet specifically, but given that they didn't say that different arc would scale differently, we can assume that without precision aiming at weak points, these would also likely require around double the shots to take out from what they used to before. And at that point, it's just not really a viable thing to go out and do the Queen or Matriarch hunting with a Hullcracker unless you have a very, very specific objective that you're after. If you want their cores for crafting, or you want the Aphelion blueprint from the Matriarch specifically, as that does now drop, that is the reason that you would go out to kill them. But before the patch, it was value positive to kill the Queen or Matriarch and then just escape with their loot and sell it. Now, after the patch, you are spending more money to do this than you are able to bring out, even if you sold every bit of loot that you picked up and with no other players taking anything too. So the long and short of the changes here as they pertain to the Hullcracker specifically is that the ammo costs 25% more to straight up buy. The crafting cost of the ammo has also gone up quite a fair bit, now requiring arc motion cores instead of raw metal parts. Then the actual effectiveness of the Hullcracker itself as a weapon to counter big arc is now also significantly down from where it was. So this patch has just been a massive nerf to the Hullcracker as a result, and to our ability to comfortably kill larger arc enemies because of this. That said, one final thing to touch on before we end here is that the explosive damage changes obviously isn't only supposed to refer to the Hullcracker, but to any sort of explosives in the game, meaning grenades and mines and traps as well that deal explosive damage specifically. That said, while that should be the case in theory, after testing various grenades and mines compared to how they were before the patch, these seem to be very, very minorly changed, if at all. A bombardier can still be one-shot by a deadline mine on its body just like it could before, or if you want to go the grenade route instead, it takes 5 trigger nades and 3 snap blast grenades, which is essentially the exact same amount it took to kill a bombardier before. Maybe one more grenade if anything, but it's pretty negligible. It's functionally barely any different compared to how big the changes are for the Hullcracker specifically. And just as another example, Wolfpack against a Rocketeer, it's exactly the same as before, a full one-shot if you aim it right. I even had 1 extra homing pellet left over afterwards because 11 hitting it did the job. Point being, grenades and mines are either unchanged or mostly unchanged at least, and these are still very effective at taking down larger arc. So this is the main thing that I recommend if you want to go hunt the bigger guys, is to bring lots of powerful grenades. The Hullcracker has been nerfed a fair bit, as has the cost of running it, and so from this point looking forward, I fully expect that the best way to take out the more imposing arc enemies will be to have a nice stock of grenades to do it with and a bit of heavy ammo to back it up, rather than to bring up Hullcracker with a bunch of ammo, which is what we did beforehand. It is just way cheaper and easier to carry trigger nades and snap blasts in comparison to a Hullcracker, and they now get the job done relatively much better in comparison, at least, compared to what it was like before this patch. And again, I do feel the need to emphasize that a bastion could go down in like 15 launcher ammo shots before, and now, unless you are specifically going for the battery and the core, it took me 31 shots, literally more than double. Why did Embark do this? My best guess is that they just want bigger arc enemies to be more of a threat and require more knowledge and strategy to take them down, instead of just being able to spam launcher ammo at their faces. There are a lot of gut reactions to this patch and these changes that I think are reasonable, honestly. It's important to note that there are some potential long-term positives to consider, like yeah, it probably is better for the game long-term if killing a bastion requires precision, strategy, and planning to actually use its weaknesses against it, instead of just being able to spam fire a Hullcracker at its armor's face and then it falls over fairly easily. But at the same time, they gave the players these tools at launch, players worked out how to use these tools maybe more effectively than they intended, and now we're being punished for doing so by having those tools neutered. When it comes to things like bombardiers or bastions, I'm not overly upset about this. It does suck, but it is what it is. Grenades will still do the job for those for the most part, but it's what this means for things like the Matriarch or Queen that makes this really frustrating, because now our main ways of tackling those events have just been slapped down quite hard in multiple ways. I don't know. My thoughts on this are still very, very fresh. I haven't fully formed what I think about this, but those are my immediate gut reaction opinions. Feel free to let me know what your own thoughts are on all this stuff down in the comments below. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Some testing of the changes to explosive damage in Arc Raiders after the release of patch 1.3, which has had some pretty surprisingly large changes to the way that we will be dealing with Arc. It seems that PvE side of balancing is a big concern for Embark, and it's hard to say whether this is good for the game or not until we have more of a vision of how they want us to play and how they want it all to feel. We don't see the end goal right now, we're just seeing the changes one at a time, but I do think in the short term a lot of players are upset that they just seem to be very nerf happy at this point. We're still only like 3 weeks past the launch of the game, but this is another massive game-changing update that makes it harder for players to exist in the world. It will affect people who play less more than people who play more, because the earlier that you got to a point where you could buy Hullcrackers and then use them consistently, the more value you were able to get out of the Hullcracker before it was nerfed like this. This combined with the nerf to the security breach skill and security lockers that happened with the 1.2 update, it's just starting to feel like they're very nerf happy, a bit too much for my personal liking. That said, I hope you've all enjoyed this video, and hopefully it helps you out before you go into a raid with the wrong expectations. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.